working on the sewage side in Japan for about a year and beginning to understand it. But the thing that comes through, and picking up on some of the questions, is that my impression is that policymakers are trying to come up with a method or a policy to deal with the fact that there's two realities in Japan, that municipalities have closely guarded control of these and of sewage services and water services as well, and the way the Japanese system works, that municipal control is very important. And there's also a lot of fragmentation in the system because of the way it was organized, which means that although the town may run all of these services, it actually has to report data and or operate distinct entities to get agricultural subsidies from one ministry for part of the town, and let's say there's actually fisheries villages that get subsidies from a different part of the town. So some of the questions, my impression is that policymakers are struggling. They're trying to come up with a way and the answer that they've come up with so far is to promote wide area consolidation and public-private partnerships as potential methods. But I think my impression as an outsider is that they're still trying to figure out how to implement those. So I'm not going to talk to these slides too much. If you could just go to the next slide, please, Takuya. Yeah, it's okay. So I just wanted to say there's a lot of potential policy implications, and I'm going to focus on the bottom one there. I believe that there's a need for consolidation, and the policy models that we're probably looking at here are comprehensive outsourcing. Because Takuya and I actually, by coincidence, had a meeting yesterday where we talked about public-private partnerships. And the impression is that the French model of complete outsourcing of, say, a water company is not really widely used in Japan, while a lot of contracting out is. And so one of the things we might be looking at in Japan is how could they use comprehensive outsourcing to actually bring multiple entities together. Another thing is that, and this is why it was important that Takuya emphasized the 10 different historic sub-prefectures in Hyogo Prefecture, is that, well, these are government controlled, and many people in many countries believe that water and sewage should be public and not private, like England and Wales, for example. So you could maintain government control, but consolidate to a higher level of government to improve this. And the other thing, which I mentioned because our own co-author, Pablo Aracena from Spain, this model in Pamplona where, well, what you do is you set multi-city entities up with a quango on top of it, where you, in Pamplona, there's 17 municipalities in an overall urban area, about 300,000. But they've set up an entity where each mayor from each little town is on the board. And these are possible solutions that can deal with this degree of fragmentation. I don't want to take too much time, so I'd like to jump to the last slide, Takuya, here, because I think I've prepared too much. The last slide, which is a picture. Yeah, so this is something that I and other co-authors developed to discuss our research, which is consulting related research for a water company in Japan, in England, which has appealed its price review decision by the water regulator here. And I thought this is something quite important because it has implications here and in Japan. So I'm going to first mention, we've had a lot of questions about Jokatsu systems and non-connected systems, and that's relevant here, but not in this picture. But because there are areas so what we're trying to get after here is have the same number of people living in two different areas. And one, they're close enough together that we have one large wastewater system and a sewage treatment center all together. And physical geography, topography impact that. And of course, somebody put it that you would have non-connected systems that might be far away from it, and that makes sense. We don't have the data currently to look at those systems because they're privately run in many cases, and and the data isn't linked, but understanding the decision to integrate and not to integrate is something we'd like to bring into our research. But the bigger picture that what I really do, and I've done for 20 years or more in water and sewage, is I model costs of companies and what drives them. Okay, that's what I'm good at. That's what I do. And I've realized it's quite important in the UK context. What we have is we have a regulator who is acting like that, like say these are companies. They're acting like these two companies are exactly the same. Okay, and they're saying all we have to do is take the aggregate number of people and the number of amount of sewage that we treat, and we just in aggregate model them. Okay, and then we can compare the two companies. But they're leaving out the fact that the system over here is organized. Maybe there's a mountain in between here or something, and they're leaving out in their analysis that although it's the two companies that are identical, the costs are much higher in the system, because topography and geography mean that you have to have 4 different systems and move the sludge in trucks to a different place. Okay, so so there's a really, so one of the, I know in the ADB project and with the Bill and Melinda Gates, there's an emphasis on effectiveness and understanding costs. So one of the things that I'd like to emphasize is that you really have to be careful that you're modeling the right stuff and taking into account those costs. No, go back to the picture, please, Takuya. Those differences, and then can you go back to the picture? And then the research question that we're trying to understand in Japan is a very different one. That in the UK there used to be 1,300 sewage entities before 1974, where they just consolidated them to 10. Okay, they used to be run by municipalities and regional authorities, very similar to Japan. But what we've got in Japan is we've got separate data. If these are 4 towns, right, and we've got separate data for them, and what we need to understand better is, well, when does it make sense to physically connect those, to managerially connect those, and that's what our research project is trying to do. And right now, the big policy question in Japan is that each of these towns has separate, if these are separate towns, they run them separately, they're not integrated, and we have to model those costs, which is what we're working on, to understand, well, what are costs in this system, and would it be better for these 4 towns to come together to become like this system, or should they stay separate but have a depot in the middle where they run all the stuff from? So the implications here, which I'm not getting across that well, is about, well, you need to understand if this is one company, you need to understand the detail within the company appropriately. And the UK regulator has really gone wrong in its modeling approach in its current price review, because it hasn't done that in our context. But in Japan, you need to understand when it makes sense to integrate these. And we're trying to answer those questions in our research project. And that's what I wanted to say, following up about what our project is trying to do to try to model this fragmentation and provide answers, basically.